Hello my fellow Earthlings and welcome to my second series in which we'll be covering the absolute worst game to ever come into existence, real life. But before we begin, a little history/geography lesson. As you may be aware, I live on the old continent, which is divided roughly into three parts. First we have western parts, with Canada, United States of Her Royal Majesty, a black hole that reeks like disgusting cheese, and that bit where everyone is lazy. Then there's central part, with Vikians, sausage-fueled automatons with no self-preservation instinct, and another bit where everyone is lazy. Now, you might think that having access to Mediterranean Sea turns you into a useless deadbeat, but do not worry, there is plenty of other wastes of human skin running around the old continent, as I will prove in this very video. But back on topic, we've covered west and center, so that of course leaves the glorious, magnificent east, the absolute best part of old continent, populated by Slavs and some statistical errors we will not talk about. Now let's face it, while West and Center spent last 1,000 years arguing over who makes the most disgusting food, people of the East were exploring outer space in their Slav squad-powered rockets while drinking potato vodka way before potatoes were even invented. But everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked, when October Revolution happened in November. You see, there was this fella called Lenin, who read a ton of books written by one of the soulless automatons, designated K. Marx, and this Lenin guy went, hey, so there's this bloke who had some decent ideas, like pushing for workplace safety. Let's completely ignore his good ideas, take all the bad ones, crank them up to 11, and add some genocide. At this time, Lenin's homeland was still ruled by the Tsar, but since he was getting his ass handed to him by the soulless automatons, people decided that even syphilis-ridden Lenin would be a better alternative, and went on with his crazy little revolution. Come on, who wouldn't want Lenin? The man was so obsessed with effectiveness that the moment he took power, he went, you know what? Russian people spent generations working themselves to death and dying from starvation, so now they will work themselves to death in well-organized camps, and will die much more swiftly and efficiently by bullets. His ideas were so rad that after next big war, when Lenin's boy Stalin was sending out party invites, about 1/3 of the continent rushed to join in. Really, they wanted to join the party and they totally were not stood up by their so-called allies. And so, West and Center returned to their pointless baguette versus schnitzel disputes, and in the East, Communist Party rocked hard, smashing up the joint. They really smashed the joint. They've been gone for almost 3 decades now, and the joint is still fucked up beyond any repair. But you might wonder what was so cool about Communist Party. Well, we've covered gulags and mass executions, but there was one bit we were not talking about. Paperwork. You see, when you shoot your people en masse, you need to keep everything in a ledger. After all, you wouldn't want to call on for an execution of someone you've already executed 3 times. And so everyone in Stalin's Facebook group evolved some wicked cool bureaucracy that proved to be absolutely unkillable. Like cockroaches, except cockroaches are much better looking and not so annoying. Now, you will no doubt say, but that was long time ago, surely things are different now. Well, not really. That long time was actually less than 30 years ago, so the majority of the people who were making careers under red banners are still kicking today. Hell, some of the blokes who, in good old communist days, were actively putting other blokes in prison for wanting to get rid of communism are currently notable politicians who say they spend their lives fighting communism. I wish I had a joke for that, but that's just ridiculous. But then again, they are politicians, and from what I can tell, when you become one, they clinically remove the ability to understand word hypocrisy from your brain. The worst part is that you can't go 10 meters in the street without walking into some old-timer who claims that life's been better under commies. Sure it was. There was no unemployment, for instance. You had an obligation to work, and the state had an obligation to find you work, even if that work was watching paint dry. But hey, there was no unemployment. The inflation was so high that almost everyone was a millionaire, and if you had that little thing called centrally planned economy, you were able to take your millions and stand 10 hours in a line to the shop that sold nothing. I'm sorry, that got a bit dark. Cheery thoughts, cheery thoughts. So the thing is that even some time has passed, the red shadow still looms over eastern parts of old continent, and overblown and deranged bureaucracy is one of the more prominent parts of that shadow. And due to some unfortunate events, I am forced to walk in one of those bureaucratic Byzantine maelstroms, for which I am rewarded with steadily progressing madness and crippling poverty, because I earn Eastern European salary, which means I can't afford anything better than basic existence, but I'm still one tiny step from starving to death. And so, even though original red communism may be gone, its idea of self-perpetuating misery is still alive and well. Now, before we continue, a quick disclaimer. 1. This series is nothing more than a vent for me, and as such it probably won't be regular. 2. Every situation described here will be, unfortunately, real. 3. I will not mention any names because people here really have no sense of humor, and getting fired for making a YouTube video is not something I'm aiming at. So, without further ado, let us dive right into rabid insanity that is post-communist bureaucracy. Imagine a car. A regular car, a machine used to transport goods, people or both from point A to point B using the power of combustion. Almost every company needs cars to work, and the one I'm working at is no different. However, every single car needs its own documentation. Again, makes sense. So to kick this series off, let us follow the journey one little piece of paper makes before it's given to the right person. I can hear you asking, but what journey could that be? Can the section responsible for cars just buy them directly? Well, you could ask that, if you are naive, but it's bureaucracy we're talking about, and bureaucracy is not about effectiveness, but about justifying existence of countless mouth breathers who couldn't wipe their own asses without instructions, and in case of my company, some of them can't do it even with them. So here's this. First, one section, we'll call it section 0 from now on, in the main office procures required documents from an outside company. They give it to their accountants to put in the ledger, and then immediately remove them from the ledger and send them to another office on the other side of the town. And for now, that person that went there is suspended in stasis until further notice. On the other side of town, documents are handed to Section 1, who puts them in the ledger and instantly moves them out to Section 2. And here's where insanity ensues. Section 1 and Section 2 are located in the same building, in the same room, and are operated by the exact same person. It's basically like this.
I'd like an ice cream about this high. Okay, coming right up.
And we're not even halfway there. Then, person from Section 2 gives the documents to accounting in Section 3. In Section 3, the accountant puts everything in the ledger. Again. From there, Section 3's accountant goes to his boss, who needs to verify the admission. Once it's verified, and depending on the day it can take from either 15 minutes or 10 years, the admission is approved. Section 3's accountant removes that Section 0 person from stasis and hands them document they need. So they once again go to Section 3's boss, who then needs to approve another set of documents, which they need to go to Section 2 and get their car documentation back. Then they bring them back across town to Section 0 office. Yes, that entire loop is completely, utterly pointless, but it's there anyway. Back in Section 0, it's very much the same procedure as in Section 3. Papers go to the boss for approval, then come back, and only then are they given to the outfit responsible for actual cars. Think it's over? Nope! Then they need to be transferred to a subsection that deals specifically with paperwork, and there the madness finally ends. I know what you're thinking. Can't car section just buy the documents themselves? Or even the subsection? Well, they could, but first, then it would be too easy and too sensible, and there's nothing government employers hate more than their workers having some time for themselves, because then they might start to, God forbid, think, and realize that nothing in this country will ever work if even simple thing like getting a piece of paper from A to B requires 8 people to do it. And secondly, because everything is so needlessly convoluted, everyone feels important. Really, people treat these pieces of paper like they're relics, like they're words of wisdom written by Confucius himself. Oh, and remember when I was talking about storing data on the computer? I was only talking about storage data. Actual paper pushing is still done by hand, like in 19th century. And, of course, it would be too easy to just have a single set of documents for this entire death march. Nope, instead every single move I mentioned needs 4 copies of papers, one for accounting, one for the recipient, one for the man further up the chain, and the last one for the section who made the documents to put in their own books. And then, oh no, the madness is not over yet. Once it begins, the ride never ends. So then, every single document needs to be signed 4 times, by the person who made it, and their boss, by the recipient, and by the guy who gives the documents to him. And yes, that means that person from Section 1 and 2 makes documents for themselves. So that gives us, what, 9 moves times 4 equals 36 sheets of paper and 144 signatures. Are you following? If yes, please contact me because I've been working there for years and I still can't figure out what the fuck is going on. This is actually the worst part. I've been asking several people why it's so deranged and needlessly convoluted. I gave all the arguments you might probably be thinking about right now, that it makes no sense, that it would be much more efficient to do this directly without the need for this crazy web of interdependent people. I mean, if one person there gets sick, then this entire house of cards just collapses. And the answers were scary. It's always been like this, say people who work here longer than me. They're not paying us to have ideas, say others. Really? Oh yes, right, I forgot. I completely forgot we're living in Dark Ages, and if the guy above in hierarchy says that the Earth is flat, then it most certainly... Oh, for fuck! So now you know a little bit more about bureaucracy, a topic that I'm sure will come in handy for you hundreds of times. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have suicidal thoughts to wrestle with, but stay tuned for another land of confusion, which will certainly happen sometime because I'm 100% sure talking about my job on the internet won't attract political officers to visit me in my home.